Welcome to the Parliamentary Agenda. Thank you for joining us. My name is Shaquan Gill. I am your host for this program, and for this discussion, I have the Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, the Honorable Dr. Ashni Singh. Dr. Singh, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, Shaquan. It's, of course, always a pleasure to be here and to speak with you.
Definitely. Dr. Singh, a number of things will be coming up in the National Assembly on Monday, and we want to talk about a few of them. But one of the most important things is the financial paper that will be presented to the National Assembly on Monday. Now, many persons have had the idea or the belief, and as we know, we've passed the largest budget in our country's history. So why this extra $44+ billion?
Sure. So you're absolutely correct that the upcoming sitting of Parliament is an extremely important one. I mean, in fact, I would go further and say every sitting of Parliament is important because in the Parliament we're transacting the people's business, we're addressing important legislative issues, we're debating and ventilating issues of national and public interest. And so I regard every parliamentary sitting as being of extremely high importance. And I mean, of course, sittings vary in terms of the composition of their agenda. Some sittings have a relatively light agenda, some have a heavier agenda. They're all important, but the magnitude of the business to be transacted depends, of course, on the volume of business on the agenda. This upcoming sitting, in fact, has a very substantial agenda with a number of extremely important items, which makes the sitting a very important one. You highlight one, and your assessment of that particular item, the supplementary financial papers, your assessment of that item as being of special importance is an assessment that I share. We will be considering the first financial paper for 2022, financial paper number 1 for 2022. And it's a financial paper that proposes supplementary appropriations totaling $44.8 billion, like you said. If I might go back to the budget, given the context in which you framed your question, indeed we did have the largest budget ever in early in the year in 2022. And that budget outlined and articulated and reiterated all of the policy priorities of our government, modernizing our country, transforming our economy, improving economic resilience, including through diversifying the productive sector, improving the quality of social services, etc., etc. And the budget was, of course, accompanied by detailed budget estimates and an appropriation bill, which then became the Appropriation Act, that brought into law the financial provisions that would be required to implement the budget. We have, of course, as a government, an extremely comprehensive development agenda. I'm not going to repeat all of the pillars of this development agenda, but they include, of course, rolling out infrastructural development, like I said earlier, improving social services, etc. And we're pushing aggressively to implement this agenda in the interest of improving service delivery to the people of Guyana and in the interest of improving the lives of Guyanese people in the shortest possible time. That's our agenda, and we have said so publicly. In fact, you would know that the opposition has lamented that we are moving too fast, and we have answered that by saying that you couldn't possibly move too fast, or there could be no such thing as moving too fast when it comes to addressing the things that affect people's lives most critically, and when it comes to improving delivery of service, the quality of delivery of services to the citizens of our country. We are indeed in a hurry to achieve development outcomes in our country, and we will continue to press ahead aggressively in implementing the development agenda, which brings me now to the supplementary provisions. If one were to go beyond the $44.8 billion and one were to look at the composition of the $44.8 billion, you will see in there a number of extremely important allocations allocations that go to the core of improving the lives of the Guyanese people. So let me just mention just a few to give you a flavor. Perhaps the lion's share, the largest share of the $44.8 billion is going to the housing and water sector. And there are two main components in that allocation. So housing and water together, if my memory serves me correctly, will be getting about $21 billion. Almost $16 billion of that will be going to housing development. And about $5 billion will be going to water. Let's talk about what that comprises. We have given a commitment. In fact, we resumed the National Housing Program since we came into office. We have moved swiftly to address the vast backlog of house lot applications that we inherited when we came into office.
Yeah.
We've made a lot of progress in reducing that backlog. We have distributed to date perhaps in excess of 10,000 house lots. You know, we have resumed the Dream Realized program. We've had a number of house lot allocation activities. We are not only allocating house lots, but we're doing all that comes with ensuring that that allocation letter is translated to actual home ownership. And what do I mean by this? First of all, we have accelerated the identification, preparation, and infrastructural development of new housing areas. So there's a vast range of new housing areas that are being developed that previously were not being developed. Here I'm speaking of things like Little Diamond and Greater Diamond, Cummings Lodge, LBI, and that whole area south of the East Coast or east of the East Bank, where we are developing this entire new corridor of industrial, commercial, and residential developments. And I only mentioned some in Demerara, but we're doing the same, of course, in other areas. We have a new housing scheme in number 75 Village, for example, in Berbice. We have the same in Linden. We have the same in Essequibo, in Region 3. And so you would know, and your viewers would know, that this program has been put, the housing program has been put on the front burner. And we're pushing it as aggressively as we possibly can to ensure, like I said, that the areas are demarcated, they're identified, we put in the roads, we want to make sure that we develop the infrastructure so the house lot applicants can get their houses. In addition to this, we've recognized that there is a large population of potential homeowners, of applicants, who in fact would prefer to have the support to get the house built for them. I mean, if you think, for example, a young professional couple, or indeed a young professional individual, they have a full-time job, they've never built a house before, they have no experience building homes, they have no expertise doing this, and just the task of taking on home ownership can be very daunting for people. You know, most people, you're doing this for the first time. You're probably only going to do this once or twice in your entire lifetime. You're young. You're busy with your job. We've come to learn that there's a large population out there who would like a home constructed for them, a turnkey home constructed for them. And so we've brought to the front burner a number of turnkey home construction developments. We have Young Professional Scheme. We have, a variety of other schemes where we construct the home. And what you're getting is not only a plot of land, but you're getting a house constructed as well. Then, in addition, of course, we're also providing other assistance. We've implemented a number of fiscal initiatives to reduce the cost of borrowing and to encourage people to be able to borrow to develop their homes. We have just introduced a program whereby we're going to assist people who have house lots to build their homes and so on. So the sum total of the effect of all of this is that the housing program is moving ahead apace. And we want to make sure that all of the existing applicants who have an allocation letter, we want to make sure that their house lots are ready for occupation, or that their homes are ready for occupation. And so we're pushing ahead aggressively. We've already made tremendous progress in utilizing the budgetary resources that were provided in the original budget, because the program is moving as aggressively as it is. And so we're seeking an additional $16 billion to advance the housing development agenda. That's the biggest single item.
Yeah.
Similarly, we have committed to achieving certain quantitative targets in terms of access to potable water and access to treated water. This involves sinking of new wells where wells did not exist, replacing of wells where wells have collapsed or failed, and particularly in heavily populated areas where there's a high population concentration, installation of water treatment plants. We've said this publicly, and this again is an area that we're moving aggressively on. And it has a close relationship with housing, because the development of new urban or semi-urban centers, the development of major new population centers, will exert a demand on the water, the production and distribution system for potable water. And so here again, recognizing first of all that there was a deficit even before the housing program was rolled out. So
Right.
there were areas where we had developed housing areas. Now that those areas are fully populated, pressure is being put on the existing system. This came up, for example, when the president did an outreach in West Demerara as a result of the new housing areas in Parfait, Harmony, and Tushan, and so on, where you have literally thousands of persons living there who were not living there before.
Right.
There's need for additional infrastructure to ensure access to good quality water. So we're rolling out we're upgrading and expanding coastal water systems, but we also have a very aggressive, and by coastal I mean urban and also rural but coastal. And we also have a very aggressive hinterland water program. This is mainly sinking wells and water collection and storage, and in some cases distribution systems in hinterland communities. So we're seeking an additional $5 billion for water, literally aimed at, so between those two alone, $21 billion to ensure that more Guyanese potential homeowners move from being a potential homeowner to an actual homeowner, and to ensure that as many Guyanese as possible have access to potable and treated water. So that accounts for $21 billion. And then there are a number of other very significant allocations as well. More than $4 billion, almost $4.5 billion has been identified or is being sought for transport infrastructure. Here I speak primarily of things like roads. There are a number of road projects. As you know, we've been moving aggressively as well. Here again, largely as a result of lack of maintenance, and over the last 5 years in particular, and a heavily stultified roads program. Roads were not being built except for just a few here and there. There is a large deficit of investment that is needed in the roads network. And so we're seeking about $4.5 billion to move that forward. The reality is that we're probably going to need more, whether in 2022 or 2023, because everybody wants their road to be fixed. And we're trying to address that need within the constraints not only of fiscal resources available, because we have to look at the budgetary resources that we can mobilize, but also within the constraints of what can be implemented in a viable manner. For many of these roads, you're calling on local contractors. You've got a finite number of local contractors, and we want to make sure that that's another issue maybe for discussion on another occasion. But we want to make sure that as many potential construction companies are involved and are getting work, but we want to make sure that they have the capacity to do the work as well. So roads will account for another, roads and other related transport infrastructure will account for another $4.5 billion. Then you would know that we hosted the first National Tushaus Council in a number of years, largely as a result of COVID-19. We had made an attempt last year to have some regional conferences with the Tushaus, and that had to be aborted because of COVID again. So this year we had a full NTC meeting, and a new executive was elected. We were able, they transacted the business of the NTC, but we were able on the governmental side, we were able also to interact with the leadership of the Amerindian communities to get a sense of what are the main issues of concern to our Amerindian brothers and sisters. What are the areas that they consider to be priority that they would like us to address? And those who followed the NTC closely, and Shakwan, I know that you followed it closely,
yes,
and
indeed.
I suspect that many of your viewers would have followed it closely, you would know that there were some dedicated sessions at which the Tushaus were invited to identify what they considered to be the highest priority intervention that they wanted to be implemented in their village to address particularly issues of transformation of the village economy, better access to social services, etc. So there was a whole session during which the Tushaus engaged in their own deliberations, and technical teams also interacted with them to identify these interventions, to derive at least preliminarily to get a sense of which sectors these interventions were needed, what some indicative costs would be involved, etc. Coming out of which, as you know, on the last day of the NTC, His Excellency the President announced an intervention of $3 billion that he was setting aside, that we're setting aside as a government, to support the implementation of interventions, top priority interventions identified by the Amerindian community, to improve the lives of our Amerindian brothers and sisters, and, like I said, to lay the foundation for more sustainable village economies, because we want the Amerindian villages to have a self-sustaining, a stronger and self-sustaining economic base. So that's another $3 billion, another extremely important intervention that goes to the core of improving lives in the hinterland in Guyana. Then there are a number of other areas. There is support for the agriculture sector, things like improved drainage and irrigation infrastructure. Here again, the challenges that we face with coastal, not only coastal, I almost said coastal, the challenges that we face with flooding. Traditionally, we have been, I suspect that there are many people who have been of the view that flooding is a problem associated with our low-lying coastal plain. But recent experience has certainly taught us that flooding is by no means confined to the low-lying coastal plain, that flooding, in fact, is a national phenomenon. We saw the May-June rains of 2021, and we saw how every single region in Guyana was affected by heavy inundation of water accumulation, of floods. So we have a significant allocation for the NDIA, about $1.3 billion for the National Drainage and Irrigation Authority. We also have a supplementary allocation to roll out the Black Belly Sheep Project. This is an initiative, as you know, emerged from our bilateral engagement with Barbados. It's situated within the context of our national food security and agribusiness agenda. In fact, our regional agenda for food security. And it came out of our engagement with our Brazilian counterparts, and our Barbadian counterparts. And in particular, as you know, we've had a number of high-level engagements at the head of government level, President Ali and Prime Minister Motley meeting themselves on a number of occasions. And the Black Belly Sheep Project is a critical component of our national food security agenda. We're looking more broadly, of course, at food production on the whole. If I'm not mistaken, I believe just today or yesterday, the first shipment of black belly sheep arrived. Was it yesterday?
Today.
Oh, it was today, in fact. So just today, first shipment of black belly sheep arrived. It would have been just a few hours ago. And so we're looking to roll that project out. As you know, we're doing a number of other things. We have the brackish water shrimp project. We have the marine cage, a project to promote seafood production, to promote aquaculture, fish farming. So there's a big food production agenda that is going on, including the Black Belly Sheep project, and that, we have an allocation in there for that. And, I could go on. There are a number of other sectors that are benefiting from the supplementary financial papers. I mentioned some of the bigger ones. There's also an allocation for GPL. This is a complicated issue. We're seeking an additional $4 billion for GPL. When we came into office, we inherited a situation where GPL, there was a vast accumulation, I think in excess of $12 billion of arrears owed to GPL by various government agencies, various public sector agencies, I should say. And we've been trying to reduce that stock of arrears. We've made a lot of progress, but a number of the entities were left in such a disastrous financial state that they're struggling to meet their obligations. GWI is one of those agencies struggling to meet its financial obligations to GPL because of the disastrous financial situation in which that we inherited GWI when we came into office. And so a lot of support is needed to ensure that GPL has the cash flow that it is needed, and that the stock of arrears owed to GPL by public sector entities is being written down. And bear in mind that this is being done at a time when fuel prices have skyrocketed, but we have committed that we will contain electricity prices. You'll note that fuel prices have moved from about $40 a barrel to more than $100 a barrel, more than doubled since we assumed office. But we have kept electricity prices. We have said that we are going to absorb the external price shock, the shock on GPL's finances that would have arisen from imported fuel prices. We've said we will absorb that. We have not passed that on to consumers by maintaining the fuel tariffs that were in place at the time that we came into office. And so there's a $4 billion allocation being sought to help to further reduce the arrears that are owed to GPL, and in so doing support the cash flow of GPL. But here again, given the stock of arrears that was inherited, given the continued challenges being faced by a number of public sector entities that are large consumers of electricity, here again, because we inherited many of them in very dire financial straits, given the dire financial straits and the dire circumstances in which we found GPL when we came into office, and the fact that we've had to maintain electricity tariffs at a time when fuel prices have more than doubled, the reality is that more than $4 billion will probably be needed, but we're at the current time, based on our assessment of the situation, we are going with a request for $4 billion. There's only one other item that I will mention at this time. Barring any others that you might wish to ask me about, of course, I'm happy to answer on any of the other items.
Sure.
There's one other significant allocation that I want to mention because of its national. They're all important nationally, but there's one in particular that I want to highlight at this time before I stop. And that is that an additional allocation of $2 billion is being sought to support the rollout of the national census. We announced in the budget that we are going to be doing the census. We made an initial allocation for the census in the budget. We now have a better sense of the scope and scale of the work, the pace at which that work is going to progress, and the extent to which we're going to advance the work, both pre-census, census day activities, and post-census. And so, having taken stock of developments in relation to the census, we're seeking an allocation of just over $2 billion to support the rollout of the census. Now, I mentioned it only because I don't want to miss an opportunity of highlighting the importance of the national census. We do this once every 10 years. Globally, that's the practice. You do censuses. Most countries do censuses every 10 years rather. And we are a part of a 10-year cycle together with our CARICOM counterparts. So a lot of this work is done in close collaboration with our counterparts across CARICOM and through the CARICOM Secretariat. And so we are, remaining faithful to the 10-year cycle, the 10-year census cycle. We're going to be doing the national census in 2022. And so there's an allocation there. And so if I might be able to pull all of those strands together, financial paper number 1 of 2022 seeks supplementary allocations of $44 billion to implement a number of absolutely critical and essential initiatives that go to the core of advancing national development and of improving lives. And as I said previously at multiple other occasions, given how important all of these allocations are to the well-being of the Guyanese people, I would have hoped that we would secure unanimous parliamentary support on both sides of the House for these initiatives. Nobody could possibly quarrel with advancing Amerindian development. Nobody could possibly quarrel with advancing development in housing and in water. Nobody could possibly quarrel with improving food security. Nobody could possibly quarrel with improving the quality of infrastructure that people have to grapple with every day. The streets, the roads, the community streets, etc. Not only main roads, but the community roads as well, the streets on which people live. And so I would have hoped that we would be able to secure unanimous parliamentary approval of the supplementary financial papers. I'm still hopeful that we will be able to secure that unanimous approval by the Parliament. But, like everybody else in the country, I'm hearing some rumblings regarding whether the opposition will be participating or not. I'm happy to come back to elaborate this, but let me say that were the opposition not to take advantage of the opportunity to come to Parliament and express their support for these important initiatives, I think it would be a huge missed opportunity for them.
Minister, just before, I know we have to talk extensively about that. Before we go to that, though, I want to ask you, and I've noticed that in this particular financial paper, the capital estimates far exceed the current estimates, and that has been a pattern of the government so far. Why is that the case?
Shakwan, you have touched on an extremely important issue, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. If one were to look at the history of our budgets, and you could look at this, you could go back prior to 1992, and you can look at the evolution of budgets from the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, and the 2000s. And you will see a clear pattern regarding the composition of successive annual budgets. The capital budget represents investment in public capital, investment in public goods, investment in public assets, investment in roads, bridges, hospitals, schools. The things that generate economic growth and well-being not only for the current year, but also for the medium term and the longer term. It's the roads, it's the highways and roads and community streets that will generate well-being and economic growth for the longer term. The schools and hospitals, they may look like expenditure today. You're building a school or you're building a hospital, but they will serve the people of our country for decades to come. The schools that we built 20 years ago are the schools in which children are being educated today. And so the people, as a matter of almost of philosophical conviction, the People's Progressive Party in government has always emphasized public investment in the things that matter most for long-term well-being, long-term improvement of social and human development outcomes, and long-term economic growth. public investment. That's the capital budget. The recurrent budget is government consumption of goods and services. Now, of course, government goods and services are important, and we, like every other government, we want to be able to deliver good quality goods and services, but not by consuming, not by having a government that consumes rather than invests. And if you think of the budget just like a household budget, I mean, you manage a budget in your own household, so does every other guy in his household. A balance has to be struck between what we consume, in other words, the things that we spend that don't leave us with an asset. We have to strike a balance between our consumption and what we save, not in monetary terms only, but what we save in terms of investing in assets going forward. And if you look across the history of budgets in Guyana, you'll see that People's Progressive Party civic governments have always placed a greater emphasis on investing in the things that matter for the medium and long term. And PNC or APNU governments have always placed a greater emphasis on consuming. And so if you look at 2015 to 2020, their budgets, well, they didn't have a budget for 2020, so 2015, I guess, to 2019, their last budget. You would see, in fact, that their capital budget was far lower than our capital budget when we left office. Our last approved budget was the 2014 budget. If you look at even in 2019, their last budget, their capital budget was dramatically less than our 2014 capital budget. But their consumption, meals and transport and travel and those things, their consumption was dramatically higher than when we left office. Immediately upon resuming office, we have sought to reverse that trend and once again emphasize investment in the things that matter for the long term and less emphasis on government consumption. And so you have hit the nail on the head. That is why you see, even in this financial paper, a strong emphasis on the capital budget as distinct from the recurrent budget. I'm glad that you observed that and highlighted it.
Minister, while we continue the conversation on what is going to be happening on Monday in the National Assembly, reports are that the opposition will not be present at that sitting. What does that mean from your perspective, of course, what does that mean for the business of the National Assembly?
Well, first of all, let me repeat what I said earlier, that the Parliament is an extremely important forum. It's the legislature of the country. It's the forum in which we, the legislators, legislate the people's business. We pass laws. We debate issues. We pose and we answer questions of critical importance. The Parliament has, I'm struggling to find an adjective to describe how strongly I feel about the importance of the work that is transacted in the Parliament, the work that is done in the Parliament. And in every country, this is the case in every country, the Parliament is the legislative peak of the state. This is the national Parliament. And all of us have an obligation to take seriously the proceedings and business of the Parliament. And were the opposition to choose not to come to Parliament, they would in effect be opting to withhold their support for all of the important initiatives that are slated for consideration in the Parliament. Were they to decide that they don't want to go to the Parliament, they're essentially saying we don't want to vote in favor of these supplementary provisions. We don't want to vote in favor of this investment in Amerindian communities. We don't want to vote in favor of this investment in housing and water. That's basically what they're saying. That's basically what they're saying. They're basically saying we don't want to go to support this initiative. And so one has to understand how significant a decision it is for them to say we don't want to support this investment in housing. We don't want to support this investment in water. We don't want to support any of these. That is essentially what they're saying. Now, it's not clear to me why they are not going to be going to Parliament. I must admit that I'm puzzled. I don't know if it is connected with the suspension of some of their MPs. As you know, the suspension of their MPs, in fact, has its genesis in the dreadful disruptive behavior that they displayed and perpetrated during the course of the sitting when the Natural Resource Fund bill was being considered at the end of last year. I believe it was the 29th of December, if I remember correctly. Now, surely, the suspension of these MPs can't be the reason why all of the APNU AFC MPs are choosing to stay away. Because the other MPs have an opportunity, even if the suspended ones don't, the other MPs have an opportunity to come and express their support for these supplementary provisions, and even more so, in arriving at the conclusion of whether they want to support or not each one of these initiatives. I think they should, but in arriving at the conclusion whether they should support or withhold their support for any or all of these initiatives, they have an opportunity to scrutinize the supplementary estimates. They have an opportunity to interrogate the supplementary estimates that we've taken to Parliament. And that's an important obligation. That's an important responsibility. It's an important responsibility which they are abdicating. They have not only an opportunity to scrutinize the supplementary provisions that are being sought, not only an opportunity, they have a responsibility to do so. That is the role of parliamentarians, to scrutinize things that are brought before the Parliament. That's the role of parliamentarians, and in particular opposition parliamentarians, when it comes to government business. They have not only an opportunity, they have a responsibility to scrutinize issues such as, and interrogate issues such as the supplementary financial paper. And they are abdicating that responsibility. Mind you, only 8 of them have been suspended. The others are continuing to occupy their position as MPs, continuing to enjoy the benefits that are associated with being an MP, but refusing to attend and refusing to contribute to the discharge of the very important responsibility that they have. But I'm also puzzled whether that is really the reason, because I understand that they were in court today. This is what I gather, if I understand correctly. I don't know if I understand correctly, but I understand they were in court today trying to convince a judge to issue an order that will allow them, the suspended MPs, to attend on Monday. I don't know if I haven't spoken to the Attorney General for the day on this matter. But when I do, I certainly plan to inquire whether I understood correctly. I understand that they were in court today seeking an order that will allow them to attend Parliament on Monday. So I mean, once again, you know, the nation is left baffled as to what exactly is the position of the opposition. On the one hand, they said publicly they're not going to Parliament. But on the other hand, it appears that they're going to court trying to get to get an opportunity to go to Parliament on Monday. Unless I misunderstood what transpired. Like I said, I'm planning to speak with the Attorney General later today to get to see if I misunderstood what I currently understand to have transpired in court today.
Minister, as we wrap up our conversation in relation to Parliament on Monday, let us talk a little bit about some of the other bills that will come before the Parliament of national importance? Remind us, what are some of those bills that we can look forward to?
So there are several, but I want to mention just a couple. It's a very substantial agenda. So there's some very, very important legislation. There's if I were to very quickly speak about the ones that fall in my sector, there's a fiscal enactments bill that addresses the support that we're providing to the mining industry to cushion the dreadful impact that the mining industry has suffered as a result of exogenous shocks. But that's a relatively small, simple, and uncomplicated bill. There are a number of there's the low carbon development strategy. We're going to be debating a motion on the low carbon development strategy. That, as you know, is a very important national strategy. It addresses the climate services that our country is providing through our standing forests to the global community, to global humanity around the world, and how those climate services being provided by our standing forests, how they can be monetized, translated into remuneration for the country, and then in turn, how that remuneration can be deployed for the purposes of advancing economic development along a low carbon trajectory. That is something that is, of tremendous importance, particularly given the context of COP26 and the obligations that country have given to transition to the low carbon realities of the world of tomorrow. The low carbon development strategy is extremely important. We're going to be debating the LCDS. I would have liked, and I'm again still hopeful, even if foolishly so, I'm still hopeful that the opposition will come and will add their voices to the debate of the low carbon development strategy. Here again, I'm hopeful that they will see the merit in the strategy, but we want their participation and contribution to the debate. We want to hear their perspective. And there will be things inevitably that we may not agree with, and we want an opportunity to hear what those perspectives are that they may offer that don't necessarily coincide fully with ours, and to answer them, because that's how parliaments work. So the LCDS is coming up. Another extremely important bill is the industrial hemp bill. As you know, hemp offers phenomenal potential for economic activity, cultivation of hemp, industrial use of hemp. As you know, around the world, hemp is now being cultivated and used for a number of purposes, manufacturing of a number of products, etc. We have said that we are going the route of establishing a hemp industry. We've already spoken about specific regions where we anticipate that hemp cultivation can take place in a commercially viable manner. And we're looking to advance hemp, which is going to help a lot of small farmers, because there are going to be a lot of farmers and persons in the agricultural sector who can get involved in hemp. And so, the industrial hemp bill outlines the legal framework within which hemp industry can emerge. This is extremely important, and I would have thought that they would have wanted to add their voice and their perspective to the debate of such an important issue. Here again, it would be most unfortunate, tremendously regrettable, if they don't avail themselves of the opportunity to be in Parliament to debate this very important piece of legislation. And there are many others. There's a mental health bill, there's an anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism bill. These are all very, very important pieces of legislation which should receive and deserve to receive the benefit of scrutiny by all parties in Parliament, of healthy and robust debate by all parties in Parliament, and then ultimately, we hope, of passage unanimously by the Parliament. So let's see. I'm still hopeful that they may see the wisdom of coming to add their voices to the many very meritorious things under consideration in Parliament at the upcoming sitting.
Minister Singh, I want to thank you for taking the time to have this discussion with us here on Parliamentary Agenda.
Shakwan, thank you very much. It's always a great pleasure.
You have heard from Senior Minister within the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashni Singh, and this has been the Parliamentary Agenda. I am Shakwan Gill saying goodbye for now.